All right, so let's talk about it. Will Bitcoin reach $1 million? I'm going to just present the information to you, and I'm going to let you decide. So I'm just going to present some basic facts to you. Now, first and foremost, you have to understand our current banking system, and you have to understand that we literally are a part of one of the biggest Ponzi schemes that's ever existed on the history of the planet. And so what I mean by that is you got to understand how our current banking system is created. It's through something called fractional reserve banking. This is the same reason, for example, like in during the Great Depression and stuff like that, part of the reason like people would go to the banks and couldn't get their money out of the banks. And the reason is because the banks actually didn't have the money. Do you realize that right now, if all of us was to go to the banks right now, and if we were all to try to withdraw our entire bank balances, it would be impossible for them to get that money to you. Let me explain that to you another way. You may think, yes, of course it's impossible because, they don't have that much money in the bank, so they got to wait and, pull it from the central banks, etc. No, there is not enough physical money in circulation for you to have all of your money in your possession. As far as all of us each having our own, sure, you can have all of your money in your possession, but if all of us in the U.S., for example, and we're just talking about the U.S., but every government is in a similar predicament. The U.S. is in the worst shape. This is the greatest risk to our national security, our national sovereignty, and it's the one risk that most people are 100% totally unaware of. Now, stick with me. I'm going to keep this as simple as I can, but I'm going to prove to you that not only can Bitcoin be worth $1 million, but the entire world ultimately will be using it as a currency. So just bear with me. So first and foremost, you have to understand that if all of us wanted to have our money at home, I don't care whether you got $10 in the bank account or $10 million in the bank account, there literally is no possible way for them to get that to you. It doesn't exist in any form, meaning the money's not actually there. It's a total facade. And I know you're thinking like, how is that possible? What are you talking about? It's through something called fractional reserve banking. So fractional reserve banking is how the US has set up its entire banking system. I have a video called Money as Debt. I will try to remember to put it at the end of this video once this video is done. But if you ever watch Money as Debt, it's about a 45-minute documentary, and absolutely everyone who's ever thought about buying a Bitcoin should watch Money as Debt. You have to understand the basics of our financial system, and that's a very easy. It's a little documentary. It's like an educational documentary. It's about 45 minutes long. I personally believe that every middle schooler in America, especially, should watch that video. No question. So, breaking down fractional reserve banking, banks are required, you're not going to believe this, banks are required to keep a certain amount of cash depositors, give them on hand available for withdrawal. That is, if someone deposits $100, the bank can't lend out the entire amount. That said, it isn't required to keep the entire amount either. Most banks are required to keep 10% of the deposit, referred to as reserves. This reserve requirement is set by the Federal Reserve and is one of the Fed's tools to implement monetary policy. Increasing the reserve requirement takes money out of the economy, while a decrease in the reserve requirement puts money into the economy. Okay, so keep following me here. Some banks are exempt from holding reserves. What that means is the money that the bank does not have to have all the money they lend out on hand. Again, you have to understand fractional reserve banking and lending. At the end of this video, if there's any of this that is not crystal clear to you, I promise you, if you just watch the video at the end called Money as Debt, this will become crystal clear to you. Some banks are exempt from holding reserves, which means some banks don't even have to have reserves. But all banks are paid an interest rate on reserves. This rate is called the interest rate on reserves, or the interest rate on excess reserves, the IOR. Okay. The rate acts as an incentive for banks to keep reserves. Banks with less than $15 million in assets are not required to hold reserves, meaning they don't have to have the money that they say they have in there if they have at least $15 million in assets. Banks with assets of less than $110 million but more than $15 million need to only have 3%. They only have to have 3%. And those banks with $110 million in assets have a 10% reserve requirement. So if they have 110 million, if they have 110.2 million in assets, they only have to have 10% of that on a reserve. Please understand that what they're able to do, if you understand how fractional reserve lending works or banking works, one of the things that happens is when they make a loan to you, if you put it this way, if I give them $1,000, they only have to keep 10% at most of that on hand. So they can loan out the other $900. But the way the banking laws work is it allows them to then turn around and say that they have $1,000 because you owe them $900 and I gave them $100. So even though they don't have the $900 in the loan they gave you, you're supposed to be repaying that loan. So the law allows them to treat your $900 loan as money that they have even though they don't have it. Are you following me? So they can still treat that $100,000 on their, that $1,000 on their books, and they can still lend out against that $1,000. And they're able to lend out up to 9 times what they have on reserves. Do you follow me? So it's not just your money they have on reserves. They can lend out against your money and against other loans. And if that sounds crazy, you're like, but they don't actually have the money. How can they loan against it? I understand. It's called a Keynesian economic model. And it gets even greater when you understand how the Federal Reserve plays a part into this. Just go watch Money is Dead at the end of this video. But in the meantime, here's what you need to know. We have a national debt that is outrageous. It's $25 trillion is the American debt. There has been nobody, no society, no government on record since they've been keeping economic records that has been in this much debt. And it's only possible because of the US dollar was considered a reserve currency. But that's getting into the deep waters. Just go watch Money is Debt and it will clarify that for you. Here's what you need to understand. $25 trillion. We get so accustomed to hearing things like billions and trillions right now that as American taxpayers, we don't pay attention to it. So that comes out to $80,000 of debt per citizen, but not all citizens pay taxes. So it's $139,000 per taxpayer right now. But we're losing $45,000 per second. You see, this is in real time. This is how much in debt the U.S. government is going into right now. So let's just assume we were going to pay it off. Let's just assume, that this number could freeze and we could start paying it off. What would it take to pay this off? Keep in mind, I told you that we're in a Ponzi scheme. We cannot pay this off. We cannot. It is impossible to pay our debts off. Watch this. Okay, so let's just assume that we were gonna, well, first let's talk about this for a moment. $1 million is 6 zeros. $1 billion is 9, and $1 trillion is 12. So let's just assume for a moment that, let's talk about Trump's wall for a moment, because I've talked about that on this channel before. Trump's wall, that wall is supposed to cost about $5 billion. That's what he's asking for right now. Some estimates say it would take $70 billion to actually build a complete wall, but he's asking for $5 billion for the wall. How do we pay for that? Well, let's just pretend that they could raise $1 million per day. Now, granted, we're losing $45,000 per second. So the first thing they would have to do is figure out how to raise $45,000 per second. Let's figure out what that is real quick. We'll get back to this. So let's see, how many seconds are there in a day? 60 seconds times 24 hours. Is that right? No, that was 60 minutes. So times 60 minutes times 24 hours. So times that by 60. I hope I did that right. 86,000, yeah. 86,000 seconds in a day. We're growing by 45, we'll round down, times 45,000. So this is how much, $3.9 billion a day is what we're losing if we're going in debt at 45,000. Oh my goodness, think about that. The U.S. government is amassing $3.9 billion, $3.8 billion a day right now, if I did that math right. But let's just assume that we're not. And let's just assume that we need to raise $1 million a day. Now understand, we actually need to raise $3 billion, $3,888 million just to get to zero. Right now. That's what has to be raised right now in additional tax revenues. But let's just pretend we're only trying to raise $1 million. Let's pretend we could freeze it because we want to figure out how long it would take to pay off the $25 trillion in debt. So let's just pretend that we're able to raise $1 million a day in tax revenue. $1 million a day. So 25 trillion, there's a million, there's a billion, 25 billion, there's 25 trillion. Divide that by $1 million. So we got 25 trillion divided by 1 million. Because we want to see how many days, if we could raise $1 million a day in additional revenue, how long would it take to pay off $25 trillion in debt? There you go. That's crazy. 25 million days. Divide that by 365. 68,000 years. 68,000. But wait a minute. We could raise more than that, right? What if we could get 10 million? Now, mind you, we're losing 3.888 billion a day. But what if we could get $10 million in additional revenues every day towards the national debt? How long would it take by then? 6,000 years. Okay, but what if we could raise 100 million a day? Now we're losing 3.88 billion. But what if some miracle we could stop losing 3.88 billion, meaning that we could raise the 3.88 billion first, right? How long would it take then? So if we could get it to the point where we could raise 100 million a day. Even if we could raise $100 million per day right now, it would take 684 years to pay off the national debt. Now, here's why this is a bit ridiculous. We get manipulated all the time and we're not even aware of it. For example, right now they're talking about this wall. And you'll hear politicians say things like, oh, we can't spend the money, we got to spend the money wisely. What do you mean spend the money wisely? We've squandered $26 trillion that we don't have, but we got to spend the money wisely. The U.S. military budget, they just approved, I think it was $70 billion, $70 billion. And we're worried about $5 million about building a wall. I mean, it's kind of crazy how they squabble over these pennies and dimes, but no one's trying to fix the solution of losing $45 billion a second. I'm sorry, $45,000 a second, being 26. So if you understand, there is literally no way that this can get paid off. But at some point, it has to get paid off. It's important for you to understand that, because the way they pay this off, again, you can go watch Money is Debt, is one of the reasons we keep going into debt is because they keep printing money to pay off debts. Right now, the American government is going into debt every second, and all we can do with our tax revenues is just pay the interest on the debt. At some point, the interest becomes far higher than we can pay. If that happens, then we end up being in a position that Greece is in or Venezuela is in, where hyperinflation takes place. Hyperinflation is when the government starts printing money, and that's typically what they do to try to pay off their debts. It's the last resort. They start printing money. And when they start printing money, you end up in a situation where in Venezuela right now, they're literally making handbags. You gotta look at this. Okay, so here we go. By the way, I found this picture here. This is an old picture, and I can't remember. This is, I think, when Germany started going through hyperinflation, and there was a story where this gentleman was supposed to use this amount of money to go and buy a loaf of bread. I don't know if that's right or not, but check this out. This is real world. This is today what's happening. Right now in Venezuela, they can't pay their debts because the government was paying for everything. The government was paying for healthcare, education. It was paying for everything. and they were using it with oil profits, but they started spending so much money. They were spending more money than they were getting from oil revenues, so they started going into debt to pay off their debts. They don't have the same mechanisms in place that the U.S. government has for now, so to pay off their debts, they were basically just printing more money. And what happens when the government prints money is inflation doesn't hit until the money gets spent. So when the government spends the money, they can pay off debt and pay for things just fine. The money still has the same value. But that money loses value and it pays for less and less. Same reason that when your parents or your grandparents were a kid, a candy bar cost a nickel. Today it costs $1. Why? It's because of inflation. The nickel didn't lose value. I'm sorry. The candy bar didn't become more expensive. The nickel lost value. So take a look at this. A kilogram of tomatoes costs 5 million bolivars. This is real world today, about 76 cents. It takes that much of their dollars to go buy tomatoes. Here's one for you. A chicken, $2.22 or 14.6 million bolivars. This is literally what they have to use to go buy a chicken. Now, here's the thing. Do you think most of those citizens had $14 million in their retirement account? No, they didn't. But when it hyperinflated away, they say they had 100 million. Let's say they had 100,000 or even $1 million in their retirement account. And it's just gone. That's the worst thing about inflation. It killed savings. It hurts those that have been waiting to retire, those that have been trying to save money. It's horrible. Look, here's another one. 3 million bolivars or 46 cents to buy 2.2 pounds of carrots. Check this one out. Toilet paper, 40 cents. 2.6 million bolivars. You need all of that cash, literally. They'll go in and buy 40-cent toilet paper. So we have to find a way there has to be a solution because currently the dollar is not going to work. So what's the solution? And most other countries peg their currencies towards, for example, the US dollar. And so, and the dollar is always seen as the safe haven in the investment space. So people are like, oh, the economy's not doing well. Let's convert to dollars. But now you realize, well, the dollar's not doing that well either. So what's the answer? It's going to have to be some sort of uninflatable, solid currency. Now, understand the US dollar was stable up until I think it was the 70s when the Bretton Woods, or the 60s, the Bretton Woods Act went off the gold standard. Up until then, $1 bought, I think it was like a gram of gold, or maybe, or it was an ounce of gold. Or it wasn't an ounce, but $1 bought gold. Maybe it was an ounce. Heck, I don't remember. But $1 bought a certain amount of gold. That was the gold standard. And Nixon took us off the gold standard, and at that point, the U.S. government they had no accountability to maintain the value of their dollars. But most countries saw the U.S. government as stable, where they're more stable. The U.S. dollar was more stable than their currency. So many of them were backing up their currencies towards the U.S. dollars. And some of them still use the U.S. dollar to back up their currency. That's scary. So what's the solution? It has to be something that cannot be manipulated. It has to be something that everybody can trust. And there's no other government that can be trusted. Everybody's fearful. No one trusts China. And people are losing trust with the U.S. So what other government? It has to be a large, stable economy. China has a large economy. The U.S. has a large economy. The Eurozone has a large economy collectively. However, they're having their own issues. So what else do you do? Gold is too cumbersome. They've been wanting to go to a digital currency for years anyway. And the only digital currency that makes sense is ones that you cannot manipulate, such as a blockchain. For the first time ever, it was only through blockchain technology and Bitcoin that we found something that everyone can rely on. It's the only thing that makes sense. So I think that first, just like Venezuela right now is creating their own cryptocurrency, I think first governments are going to try to do things like this. Or if you understand my last video where I talked about backed, through the markets such as backed, I think the governments are going to attempt to try to either create their own cryptocurrency or manipulate blockchain through things like backed and sidechains, etc. But it's important for people to understand that blockchain technology is a solution, and that you being able to hold your own Bitcoin in your own privacy, in your own keys, that people can't print more Bitcoin. They can't they can't manipulate the blockchain itself. They may manipulate side chains, they may be able to manipulate it through financial instruments, but they can't actually manipulate the Bitcoin yourself. If you have one Bitcoin, you have one Bitcoin, and nobody can literally take it away from you. It's almost confiscation proof. They would have to kidnap you and force you basically to be able to give up that Bitcoin. It's your Bitcoin. They can't manipulate it. They can't take it away. It's the only thing that makes sense. And in fact, if you look at cryptocurrencies right now, even at the other cryptocurrencies, there's nothing else that comes close to being able to work as an actual currency. XRP it has a different use case. Bitcoin has a $65 billion market cap. So there's nothing else that makes sense. Ethereum has a different use case. It's not designed to be a currency. Okay, Bitcoin Cash. But Bitcoin Cash is floating around at a fraction of Bitcoin. It doesn't have near the trust. I mean, not even close, not even remotely. EOS has a different use case altogether. Stellar has a different use case. Tether's different. Litecoin, maybe. Litecoin could work. However, again, it's 1.8 billion. Most people, Bitcoin SV, 1.5. Tron, different use case. So Bitcoin's really the only thing that makes sense. And if you understand that, the question is, okay, so how does Bitcoin become, wait a minute, let me back up for a moment. So how does Bitcoin become worth $1 million? Well, if you understand that Bitcoin is going to be accepted by the masses, it has to be. Let me throw my ace in the hole. If you still are hesitant, and if you have any sort of Judeo-Christian principles or beliefs at all, then I'm going to go throw this one at you. And that's the mark of the beast. So what is the mark of the beast? So biblically, the mark of the beast is talks about, a mark that you get, and it's in order to have this mark, you have to have this mark basically to be able to buy food and to buy groceries and medicine for your kids, etc. And if you don't accept the mark, then basically, if you do accept the mark, then basically you're like damned to hell or whatever. So that's the belief, the mark of the beast. And there's also beliefs that the Antichrist will rule essentially under one world government. Bear with me. If you don't have Christian beliefs, just bear with me. I'll show you the math in a moment. But if you do have Christian beliefs, then understand that there are forever Christians have said, I'll never get the mark. I'll never get the mark. But Bitcoin technology is the one, blockchain technology is the one area where I believe, and by the way, I am a Christian, so I do actually believe that this could happen, where I actually believe that up until Bitcoin, I didn't ever see a reason that me personally could even imagine getting something that remotely could be defined as the mark of the beast. But if you are a Bitcoin investor, you understand one of the main things is maintaining control of your private keys in such a way that they can't get stolen, lost, or damaged. So the single best way to maintain control of your private keys is to keep them in your possession. But if I put them in my wallet or anything else like that, I can lose them. But there's technology like RFID technology where they can put your private keys on a little chip. They can implant that little chip inside of you. It is the safest place. Someone would literally have to do you bodily harm to get access to your private keys. I literally believe that if the Bible prophecy is correct, that blockchain technology with RFID technology is the mark of the beast. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it if you have Judeo-Christian principles. Like, what other technology could exist out there? I can tell you that this is the only thing that would ever make me get an RFID chip. You ain't ever got to worry about losing it. It's in your possession. I might want to put it somewhere else other than my hand. But imagine when we get to a place where there's Bitcoin, where there's mass adoption, the number one issue, the number one problem towards mass adoption is shifting people's mindset from your identity being how you get access. Like, for example, if someone breaks into your bank account or steals your credit card and runs up a high credit balance, typically you can prove to the credit card companies that that wasn't you doing the spending, and they will just refund your money. But if someone steals your private keys, there's no way you're getting that money back at all. So that's a fear that some people have. RFID crypto wallets, I believe, will be coming in the future, and that is the solution right there for keeping your private keys safe. So that's just another bonus tip right there where I'm like, yep, Bitcoin's going to be some sort of cryptocurrency. Right now, it clearly looks like it's going to be Bitcoin is going to have mass adoption. Some sort of decentralized public blockchain cryptocurrency is headed towards mass adoption. I fully believe it. Now let's talk about how does Bitcoin get to become worth $1 million each. There's two ways. This article talks about one, but I'll tell you another one. We'll read this article, but I'll tell you a second way once this article is done. So could Bitcoin rise to $1 million? Theoretically, yes, although consider what that would mean. As of this writing, there are approximately 16.7 million Bitcoins in circulation. A price of $1 million each would translate to a total value of $16.7 trillion. Actually, it's going to be 21 trillion because there's going to be 21 million Bitcoins eventually. But 21 trillion for all Bitcoins in existence. Currently, the total value of Bitcoin is whatever. Meanwhile, the U.S. money supply, which includes all physical currency, demand deposits, savings accounts, money markets, is about 13.5 trillion. And this is just one country's money supply. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is truly an international currency. In fact, US-based transactions are one of the smaller sources of Bitcoin volume. With that in mind, consider that the global M2 money supply is estimated to be at about $68.7 trillion expressed in US dollars. So in other words, my point is that while Bitcoin would have to work a little to become a major player in the global currency market, the total Bitcoin market value at $1 million each isn't an outlandish amount of money. No, it's even bigger than that. It would only take $21 trillion to be worth $1 million each. So arguably, based off of this math, Bitcoin could be worth at about $3 million each in today's money. Think about that. That's in today's money. $3 million each, possibly, if it became the world currency. And I don't know how it's not going to eventually be the world currency. I actually think at some point the US government I think they're going to first try to co-opt and manipulate the market. But at some point, I think they're going to start buying up Bitcoin, and I think China's going to start doing it as well. Just like both governments started buying up gold when they were fearful of other governments having power through gold or having authority through gold. I think that at some point they start buying up Bitcoin. At some point. We'll have to wait and see. The problem is right now, ladies and gentlemen, we are so far ahead of the game. I mean, right now, at this very moment, cryptocurrency is only valued at, did I have it up here? Oh, here it is. Bitcoin is only valued at $3,000, almost $4,000 right now. We are so far ahead of the game, and it may drop down to, $1,000 a Bitcoin or less. Who knows? Nothing I'm saying on this is meant to be, none of this is meant to be financial advice. You make your own decisions. Consider it satire. Heck, I done pulled out the mark of the beast on you. But the reality is that I don't know any other solution. And if you have a more viable solution, a better solution than going to a one world currency, a digital currency, then open, public, trustless blockchain technology, there's no better solution that exists on the planet. And so I don't know how we don't eventually get to a monetary system that is totally Bitcoin based or blockchain based. That is $1 million per Bitcoin. Now here, I told you I would give you the second way to get to $1 million per Bitcoin valuation. John McAfee has said, he's talked about before, and one of the ways he says that we'll get to that valuation is by the time the 21 millionth Bitcoin is mined, he said the energy cost in and of itself will be in excess of $1 million. And Bitcoin is somewhat priced according to the energy cost. That's not exactly correct, but he's saying that as energy cost goes up, the cost of mining goes up, Bitcoin prices tend to go up. So he says by the time that 21 million Bitcoin is mined, that alone is going to push the valuation per Bitcoin up to $1 million or more. So either way you look at it, there are several ways we get to $1 million in Bitcoin. But the bottom line is, the crux of this video is it happens through mass adoption, and there's no way, in my personal opinion, there's no way that we're not going to end up in a space where cryptocurrency is adopted by the masses. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Please, by all means, leave a comment down below and let me know what your thoughts are. I'm just dying to hear what you have to say about this. Ladies and gentlemen, we literally are part of the crypto revolution. We are a part of history right now. Just by watching this video, there's going to come a time when people are going to go back and look at this video and be like, $3,000? Lord have mercy. Bitcoin's almost 3 million. Could you imagine if only we had invested when Bitcoin was at $3,000? Could you imagine if we only bought one? There are people out there who say that we should all have 1% of our net worth in Bitcoin. And I like the people who say, hey, everyone should try to own one Bitcoin. That's another thing. If everyone tried to own one Bitcoin, every adult on the planet tried to own one Bitcoin. I forget the math on that, but that runs it up over $1 million. So there you go. 3 total use cases or 3 total ways that you get to a Bitcoin valuation over $1 million. If you believe in the future of cryptocurrency, then you have to subscribe to this channel. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to include the video at the end called Money as Debt. Please be sure to subscribe to this channel. Join us in the crypto revolution and make certain that you watch that video, Money as Debt. And if you want your kids to have their future secured, then they have to understand the concept, your kids or grandkids. If they're middle-aged, if they're like middle school aged, make certain that they watch the video, Money as Debt. You can click on it now.